Hello, friends. Those of you who have joined us online, we are delighted to have you with us. You're in the right place. It's Topical Torah. Our custom here, many of you already know this, but our custom is to be lunching. I have to thank Gail Gordon brought me lunch. That's this direct way to your rabbi is through his stomach. I just want to point that out. In any case, keep it in mind if it's in any way useful to you. Our custom is to enjoy lunch, and those of us who are here in person enjoy lunch and interaction with each other. For those of you who are going to be joining us on screen, the program will begin at the bottom of the hour at 12:30. So between now and then, go grab yourself a bite to eat or something to drink, and we will be starting together at 12:30. no, I understand. But the issue is, a lot of people will read that and go, oh, I can get a cup till 2. Whereas if we say 12 o'clock. Maybe even 12:45. Exactly. So better if I say 12 o'clock and then essentially repeat what I'm about to do again, over and over again. Hi, folks who are here with us on screen. You're in the right place. It's Topical Torah. Wave to those nice people. There you go. So, yes, we who are here in person for the program are enjoying lunch with one another. I hope that you'll do the same as well. It's not that the sound isn't working. We're just having a little schmooze and lunch with one another. We encourage you to do the same, and our program will begin in 23 minutes at 12:30. So I had to touch one little thing, and then I couldn't help but be surrogate grandfather. And I was like, you could say this, not the photo. So I did that, and then he sent me another photo. So I got a list of big photos. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I'm sorry, what did you just say? This is about Rabbi Goldberg's baby. I know. So it says his automatic reply says he's coming back on the 14th. He's always, what he's doing, they're doing something. It's becoming a concept with younger folks. We old folks don't understand this, but the young folks do. He asks us if he and his wife, Liz, who works at UCLA, could stack their weeks. So instead of being home together, stack their weeks. So instead of being home together with the baby for 3 months, which obviously is the way we all have it, what they've chosen to run over to instead. First of all, she can apparently extend her leave. So I think she's going to get like 5 months or something like that. He's taking 2 weeks now. So obviously he'll be home immediately after the break. And he's coming back. And he'll be with us all the way through holidays, he's been here for a long time. Working while she's on leave. When she goes back to work in, I think it's mid-October, late October, he's taking 3 months back. Or actually, we'll be doing 2 weeks here, so he will take another like 11 weeks at that time. So his leave will be much delayed, but the baby will have one of them home full time for most of its first year. Yeah. No idea. Not that I'm aware of. They probably have bricks yesterday somewhere there, but we're all on a need to know basis. He's doing his own thing. Well, at least we know there was a purpose. Yeah, I like the odds. Yeah. It's funny that you say that. I literally was just commenting on that a couple minutes ago. At the moment, it's all women. You know what? It's used to be too often only for men back in the days. You know what? If the women have us outflanked for a little while, it's fair to even things out a bit, no? We kind of have them outflanked for, thousands of years. That seems fair. To me. Shelley's like, no, it does not feel fair. I did not mean to. Is anybody? These are the printed copies. Everybody jump to one. They're over here. Does anybody want the printed copy? Like the reading materials? Yep. Anybody who wants is welcome to have it. I don't have it. I don't have it. For those of you who know Scott, yeah, he goes, when he goes underground, he goes underground. He is underground. I felt bad enough that I had to send a text to him. It wasn't because he was actually a really nice thing. He cared for me. He wanted me to reach out on their behalf to offer him his trade. Yeah. So I did. And I already felt like bad in the back. Still lost, right? So I'm like, I'm going on at work. I just wanted to say, I hope you guys are enjoying your adventures. And if you want a meal trade, I will connect you with Dina, Rucker, who kind of coordinate. He said, oh, what would you do? I'm happy. I was wondering if I was even going to hear back. But I did. And then, of course, I did the shameful grandpa thing. You could send me another photo. So then he sent me another photo. I did get the photo, which I will do. I'm going to bring them home. Don't forget to take a bite from the one. Yeah, I'll get the one. Hi, folks. If you're joining us online, you're probably noticing that I'm here, but I don't seem to be doing the program. Well, that's not an accident. Our custom at Topical Torah is to enjoy lunch, as these lovely people who are in the room are doing right now, and as we hope you are maybe doing at home or at work or wherever it is you're joining us. For those of you who are watching this on recording, you can just fast forward up to 30 minutes into the program, because program begins, the actual content of this gathering for Topical Torah will begin at 12:30. That is 18 minutes from now. To those of you who have joined us from home or from work, welcome. This is, in fact, Topical Torah. It's just the lunch half hour. And so, as you can see, our room is filling up with lunching Leo Beckers. And we hope that you're getting a bite to eat, something to drink, and preparing to join us for the program, which will begin the content of our gathering. And the topic will begin at 12:30, bottom of the hour, 12 minutes from now. needs to kind of get past his Peter Pan stage and try to accept that he's been dating the same woman for 11 years. And it's kind of time, they're like an old married couple. So,
This is probably why they're not moving fast enough.
yeah.
In this relationship up to now.
Yeah, for a long time she had a good sense of humor about that, or sense of humor. My son's long, I call her the girlfriend feels ridiculous. She had her family there. That was us. I mean, they started dating on the summer of the CIT summer in Camp Elliott. So they were 16 years old. And they're 27 now. So, yeah. Yeah. Well, they, well, actually, by the time you officially joined, my son, was grown and done. So you didn't get to know him. But those who know him probably can answer your question, what are you waiting for? I mean, he's busy being like college. I'll put it this way. He constantly tries to subtract 1 year from his actual age, saying that the pandemic year should not count. And I'm like, that would be really cool, but I don't think it works that way. I think that your organs are actually older anyway. So Peter Pan is not crazy about growing up, and oh no, he's in New York for a long time. Yeah. But they're starting to make some noise about coming back. So we are hoping. All right, one more announcement for everybody. That's not true. Who is she? Yeah, hear about that. Greetings to those of you who have joined us via our live stream. This is Topical Torah. You're in the right place. And we're actually just finishing. Our table is filled with happy Leo Beckers who are enjoying lunch and conversation. Conversation is going to turn to our topic starting at the bottom of the hour. So it's 12:25 right now. You got 5 minutes to grab yourself a bite to eat, something to drink, and please be joining us again at the bottom of the hour, 12:30, when we will begin our program. Well, I may have to do a little bit of quieting the local troops because it is 12:30 and we're going to begin our program together in just a moment. But it's so nice to have the room full of lovely folks who are able to be with us in person. That's good news. I'm delighted that so many of you are also able to join us via the live stream. This program has been taking place in this room ever since the end of the pandemic, precisely so that folks who are at work or at home or just for whatever, or maybe even traveling and can't be here in person but want to participate in the program, hear about what's going on, be a part of the discussion, at least by being able to watch and listen in, we'll have the opportunity to do so. So we're delighted that you've joined us via our live stream as well. Super grateful to all of you who are here in person, and I want to begin by walking through. I hope those of you who joined us on screen got the link to join us via one of our email messages that we sent out, because at that same space, just underneath where you would find the link, you will also find a link to the readings, which you can easily click on that link that says readings, and you'll have the material that we're, at least during the presentation part of this, that I'm going to be referring back to for at least much of it, not all of it, but grabbing elements of it to try to expound on a little bit. So if you have access to the readings, that will come in handy for you as well. There were 3 readings that I sent out in anticipation of this conversation. One is a debate that took place between 2 scholars and historians having to do with the whole question of what is the Jewish history on Jews living in authoritarian times and under different kinds of regimes. We all know that while it feels like an obvious assumption that we would live as Jews in democratic regimes, it's actually only been for a really narrow little slice of time that Jews have lived in democratic regimes, because there haven't been democratic regimes for all that long in Jewish history. If you look at the full expanse of Jewish history, and then you look at the 250 to maybe 300 years of time where there have been democratic regimes, not just here, but anywhere, the great majority of Jewish history obviously took place before that. And so it's valuable in times where you see authoritarianism, not only here in the United States, but elsewhere rising, to get a little bit of a look at through the historical lens. And those of you who did get a chance to read that know that what was great about the little debate was that they specifically invited 2 debaters, both of whom are respected scholars, who see the matter somewhat differently in terms of one kind of making the case for how Jews have flourished in authoritarian times, the other talking about what we should be deeply concerned about. And so that was the first. The second was a piece written by our Temple congregant and a really important scholar in the Jewish world for a long time at Hebrew Union College here in Los Angeles, also at the Jewish Community Relations Council. I'm talking about Dr. Stephen Windmuller, who was recently on our Temple Board of Trustees also. He does quite a lot of writing, publishing on this topic, and has been traveling all across the United States, dealing with all sorts of matters pertaining to the Jewish American people as a polity. So the intersection between our political life and our life as an identity group. And so he's really got a lot of expertise on that, and that expertise is obviously being called on quite a lot, specifically in this moment, which is so different, not only in terms of what's going on in the government, but also different with regard to the Jewish response to it. There's a real divide in the Jewish people in the United States these days between those who have tacked to the right and those who have tacked to the left. And we all know that historically, the Jews were a fairly reliable bloc, not completely, but the great majority of the Jews were a fairly reliable bloc on the left. less so at this moment. And so obviously his expertise has come into special focus and desire around the country and even beyond. And so Stephen shared a really interesting piece, which I'm going to be lifting up just a few really significant pieces of for the purposes of our conversation. And lastly, was an op-ed piece that came out in the middle of April that a lot of you must have seen, because boy, did it make the rounds. It was a hot potato, and I got so many emails from congregants the minute that it came out. Have you seen this? You got to see this. Talk about this at Topical Torah. A lot of that kind of stuff happened when David Brooks published his call for a national uprising. David Brooks, who we all know is right of center. David Brooks, who himself, he concludes the article by talking about, I'm not exactly an uprising kind of guy. Nobody really thinks of me as demonstration man. So it's a little unusual for me to go there, but he makes obviously a very fervent case. Whether you buy it or not is your business, but he certainly makes a case as to why this should be treated as a truly unique moment and one that demands a unique response. So those are the three things that were sent out. If you can get them in front of you at home or here, or at the office or here, that would be great. And I'm going to start to share with you a few observations. So let's go to the first one for a moment. The article from Moment, where you had Diana Pinto and Michael Walzer commenting on the whole question of the Jewish people under authoritarian rule. I want to highlight a few points that Diana Pinto makes in saying, yeah, Jews have flourished in authoritarian times. And I will say this, even if your resistance, if you received that article and looked at it, whether it's today or when it was first sent out, and there was a part of you that's like, no, we are democratic people, and we cannot have flourished under authoritarian rule, all I can say to you is the fact that we're here dictates that by definition we flourished under authoritarian rule. She definitely has the right of this. Doesn't mean that Walzer doesn't make points that are also right and worthy of our consideration, but the question is kind of a canard, because the existence of the Jewish people throughout the period of democratic regimes around the world only means that Jews were around long enough for that to happen, which means they obviously survived and even in different times thrived on moments like this. And for those of you who are most anxious in this moment, that's a really important, like, full stop thing to say. I guess before I launch fully into my own observations about this, I want to say something that's just for everybody, both those here and those viewing on the live stream. I am super cognizant of the unique level of angst that this moment, both in Israel and here in the United States, is causing, because as the senior rabbi of the temple, that also makes me chief pastor to this flock. And just the number of conversations, emails, catch you on the fly. I think it's Oneg Shabbat, and we're sharing a multicolored cookie, and this comes up. And we're all, I think, trying to process this moment. And even if you are enthusiastic about some of the directions that the country is going, it's still, change is unsettling, and it requires a willingness to live without a confidence about what comes next. I mean, that's why change is destabilizing. Because before the change, whatever the change, good or bad, before the change came, I was able to anticipate whatever was next. I spoke recently, this will give you a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I spoke recently with a congregant of ours who had a very, very near death experience and survived against all odds. And was asking me, needed pastoral support. You'd think, oh, no, the change was a great change. They made it. They're still here. Well, the fact that could happen and what is supposed to come next, right? All of the destabilization that comes with a seed change moment that was disruptive. And so we were talking spiritually about what kind of resources are available. This congregant was asking me, are there support groups for people like me who have survived near death? And the odds say you shouldn't be here, but you're here anyway. We have a lot of congregants like that. I'm happy to say. And then we also have congregants who should be here and are not. We have that too. But the answer is, it's not surprising to me that is, I mean, obviously this congregant is delighted that they're still here, feels deeply relieved, but it doesn't mean it wasn't a destabilizing thing. I don't now know how to fully understand and interpret my own future because I'm staring at it through a different set of eyeglasses now. Eyeglasses I didn't choose. Even though they're a blessing, I didn't choose them. And so things look differently. So that's what change does to us, good and bad change. And I say all of that also to kind of give this last preamble point. Important in this room, important in the extended room that is this program as it lives both online via live stream and in recorded fashion so that you can go back and visit it. Or if you find meaning in this program, tell another temple friend, go to the website, they can find the recording. So this program actually lives even beyond its live moment. It's important to understand that we should speak for ourselves, and you guys have heard me say this before, we should speak for ourselves in these kinds of conversations, not for the collective, because the presumption that we make that everybody must agree with us is absolutely not the case. And you may be thinking to yourself, at Leo Beck Temple, we don't all agree about this? Let me give you some news that may catch you off guard. At Leo Beck Temple, we've never agreed, all of us, about this. Rabbi Bierman, alav hashalom, would be the first to tell you if he was sitting next to me right now, because he showed me the evidence again and again. He'd finish giving one of his sermons, and one of our right of center congregants would send him a beautifully crafted, single-spaced, multi-page typewritten letter taking to task, point by point, everything that he had just said on Yom Kippur, and they would engage in a respectful and even, I would say, loving exchange of ideas, which is the whole idea, the reason for sharing ideas, is that they don't just land with everybody who goes, yeah, what he said. They sometimes land with people who are agitated by them, and agitated in lots of ways. I don't mean agitation to automatically have a pejorative sense of agitation is bad. Sometimes agitation is great and necessary. I would argue this is a moment when agitation is great and necessary. And so please know there are Leo Beck Temple members who think that the direction that both Israel and the United States are taking is absolutely right, are grateful for it, and are also destabilized by it, because it is stark. In the space of 100 days, a lot has happened very quickly, intentionally even, as you probably read about, because the speed is a part of how you pull it off, right? So there are plenty of those who are there are some who are pleased with the outcome. Then there are those who are willing to give the benefit of the doubt to the road and don't know what the outcome will be. And there are definitely those at this temple who voted for Kamala Harris, and there are definitely those at this temple who voted for Donald Trump. In fact, there are those at this temple who voted for Donald Trump 3 times and would happily do so a 4th time if it was allowed. I don't know about you, the Trump 2028 hats that are being sold on the family's website are a deliberate provocation. And apparently in the interview that I didn't view that he had on, was it Meet the Press? I didn't view it, but apparently he acknowledged, no, I'm not running for a 3rd term, so he says now, but said, yeah, so you don't know which is the truth, right? Which is also part of the game. Say both things, leave people guessing, create a little bit of drama, allow destabilization, because that makes people more malleable. When we are feeling off our kilter, it's when people call the rabbi, help me get a little bit of centering. He wants us that way. So that's a part of what's going on here. It is useful, though, even if he should change his mind, useful that he acknowledged that in point of fact, or the Constitution says you can't do that. So we'll see how much the Constitution matters by the time that comes, but that's a conversation for a different time and a different day. My point is, speak for yourself, not for all of us at Leo Beck Temple who surely agree. We do not. We do not. Okay. So with all that said, Diana Pinto begins by talking about how obviously, Jews that lived in authoritarian times and under authoritarian regimes that didn't kill Jews oftentimes did very well. That may feel like it's a flippant comment, but I'll tell you what meant, this is like right out of the gate. I'll tell you what was meaningful to me about that. One of the things I have found myself many, many times saying to those members of our temple who are most distressed about this moment, who did not want Donald Trump to be president and whose worst fears are being realized right now. What I've been saying to a lot of them is, but I'm watching as a lot of them are racing to the Nazi Germany analogies. And some of you have heard me say this before, in fact, even during the first Trump administration where people raced to those analogies. And I pointed out how, Hitler came to power in January of 1933, and by March of 1933, CNN was illegal. Like forget about the fact that he's calling it fake news. He just went to prison, so it just stopped. So vive la différence. It's really important for us, even amid our fears, to be grateful. We're having this conversation still in our beautiful temple that we all built together with our wealth and our zeal for being Jewish and being in community with one another. And are there reasons to be, I'm not here to be a Pollyanna and say there are not reasons for us to be concerned. We're going to get into them. But every authoritarian moment is not Nazi Germany. And the problem for us, I believe, as American Jews in the 21st century is that the most recent time of deep trouble for the Jews happens also to have been the worst moment of deep trouble for the Jews. And it makes it very hard for us not to see with Holocaust glasses everything. I mean, it's a huge issue for Israel. We know that Israelis, by and large, and a huge part of whatever you're seeing over there that you may or may not like, is driven by this Holocaust narrative. And we are, even in ways that we may say we resist, it's just deeply in us. We're all part of a generation that we know survivors. There are few left now, but we know the few that are still around, and we certainly knew tons and tons of survivors and maybe had survivors in our own families. Certainly leading temple members were survivors. We've had folks who served in the war, folks who liberated the camps, members of this temple. So it's not surprising that the Holocaust is just deeply on our brains. But it actually is, it's not helpful for us to say, authoritarianism, signs of fascism, Nazi Germany. Only one such case was Nazi Germany, and there were really very specific reasons actually alluded to in this material, I can't remember where, but we'll get to it, about why that one was so unique. So we should, if anything, acknowledge the uniqueness of that one and be looking for whether or not the conditions that were particular to that moment are present here or not, as opposed to, I'm seeing the undermining of democracy, here comes Nazism. It's just not, it's not accurate, and I think it's actually self-destructive to the psyche. So that was what I took right out the gate. She also points out about how over the course of history, the conservative groups, the Orthodox groups, were the ones who believed we had to kind of fortress ourselves up in order to remain safe. And so they tended to be, that is a instinct, that is a conservative instinct. That's why conservatives are bigger on defense, bigger on security. That's a psychological vantage point. And as we see right now, if any of you are looking at the Orthodox community and its steadfast support for the Trump administration, you should recognize that that is not some weird thing. And I don't get these people. How could they possibly do that? That's exactly what it's been like throughout all kinds of other such regime moments, certainly in the era of denominationalism, which has been the last a little more than 200 years, 210 years, there have been denominations. During those 210 years when there have been other lurches toward authoritarianism, it is pretty standard fare that those who are religiously on the furthest observant end of the scale are conservative in lots of ways, including their politics, and tend to be more interested in the protectionist kind of vantage point that comes with authoritarianism, the let's close ourselves off from the world vantage point that comes with populist authoritarianism, because that's what orthodoxy is, right? We're going to build our own little shtetl and keep ourselves away from everybody else. That's how we remain Jewish and how we remain safe. So it's not surprising that a mentality that is attracted to that Jewishly would look at such a moment and be more attracted to it. So it's not some mystery as to, oh my God, I don't get why the Orthodox Jews are down for this. They're down for this because it actually fits with their worldview on so many different levels. The age-old argument against assimilation is in this conversation, right? The old one that talks about all of us lovely, assimilated, successful American Jews and says, we are a, you've heard this one before, I don't agree with it, but obviously I don't agree with that. I wouldn't be a Reform rabbi if I did. You know, the assimilating of the Jews is accomplishing what Hitler couldn't achieve. You've probably heard that one before, right? Hitler tried to do away with the Jews, but the Jews are doing away with the Jews even better than Hitler did. It's actually a lot of evidence that says that our type of Judaism, yes, do we lose some folks? Some of you may have members of your family who do not see themselves as Jews anymore. So yes, we do lose some folks. We also gain some folks. There are a lot of intermarried families at this temple. And some of those folks started as intermarried families and then many years on decided, after I've made a Jewish family for a long, long time, I really don't see myself as anything other than a Jew. What's involved in converting? And I'm like, well, how about we look at the last 25 years of your life as a conversion process and say that you're a Jew. You just want to name it through ritual. We've done a lot of those kinds of conversions at this temple, and those are going on at Reformed congregations all over the world. And so, no, I do not believe the whole we are assimilating ourselves into oblivion. But yes, that's a part of why the alternative side of this is much more willing to cleave to Trumpism than, at least on a percentage basis, Jews like us are willing to do. I want to also point out, there's in the first piece, Diana Pinto talks about the work of the historian Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi, about how this became an important theme throughout the reading about Jews. She was talking specifically about European history. Yerushalmi was talking about specifically European history, but how Jews throughout history have tried to be the court Jew. It's a big part of how Jews have made it when there's been a monarchy, right? Ingratiate yourself with the king, and of course we have that, and she and he allude to it in this writing. The story of, actually I think it's one of the later writings that talks about Purim and Mordechai, right? The story of, Mordechai and Esther had the ear of King Ahasuerus, and it's how we survived against Haman. This is definitely a part, and even now I would say, in our still democratic but lurching toward authoritarianism regime, this is a part of the Jewish survival plan, is it not? For Jews who live even in our own time. Have we not ourselves, both as a people and as individual people, attempted to append to normative American power, whether that's in our places of business, whether that's in our neighborhoods, whether that's in government? We certainly have, are you not happy that there are some well-placed people who might be able to fend for us? This is a normative Jewish psychology, and even in a democratic regime, this is something that is a part of the story of the Jews making it, and, as she rightly points out, having that privileged relationship of access to the king does not endear the Jews to those who don't have it. And so the two go hand in hand, that hunger for access and the rise of anti-Semitism. And if you think about that, hopefully it at least redeems, I'm not trying to redeem anti-Semites, but I am trying to say, if you're like, well, how is it possible that this anti-Semitism is burgeoning in this moment and yada, yada, yada? The reality is, the very thing that we hunger for, which is to make it better and to get greater access and greater power, actually foments the anti-Semitism, becomes that narrative that we know is one of the formative anti-Semitic narratives. The Jews control the banks, the Jews control the government, the Jews control the entertainment industry, the Jews control the media. Well, we're working real hard to have toeholds in all those places because we're an embattled minority and we feel a lot more secure when we append ourselves and work very hard to achieve that as a mission for survival, and it has its underbelly. Those who don't have it, or especially in a country like ours right now, those who feel like they once had it and now think they don't, namely white working class people. I had that, but now educated Jews have that. Is it any wonder that they don't like us very much? Again, not necessarily fair, but it is in fact the way that it works. Yerushalmi teaches that when the Nazis rose to power in Germany in the 1930s, that the way he puts it is that there were no Jewish reflexes for dealing with this because it was a one-off. Because all of our history for how we make it in authoritarian times didn't apply, because all of that ingratiating ourselves with power wasn't an option, right? Past rulers might have hated the Jews, but they had Jews around them. The Jews were useful. They could collect taxes on our back, or we could be informers, as Mordecai was on a lot of levels, right? So there was a use for us. For the first time, you had a regime where the Nazis weren't interested in us. There was nobody to talk to. There was no red phone to pick up and ingratiate yourself to the Nazi regime. And so all of our history about how you make it in such times failed us in that moment because it was so unique, which means it's really worth watching. Does this look like that? Or does this look more like that great majority of other times where there have been lurches toward authoritarianism, but not extermination of Jews? And at least so far, even though you may really dislike the Jews that are adjacent to this power, they are in fact adjacent to this power. There was no Stephen Miller in the Nazi regime. That was not possible. And that's not to suggest that that is either good or bad, him and his policy. I'm not commenting on that. What I'm saying is Hitler did not have his one child that he actually loved married to an Orthodox Jew and raising Jewish grandchildren. That's a key distinction in this moment. So it's important that we psychologically, I want to lend that just grounding to everybody here, because I'm just having these conversations over and over and over and over again with folks. And, again, it's not of magnificent comfort, but it should be of some significant comfort. Let's look at this moment for what it is, as opposed to automatically running to Nazi Germany as the automatic default. She also points out how Jews were in favor of every liberalizing moment in history, and this is the same in the United States. That's why the majority of Jews in the United States have traditionally been left of center. That's been a Jewish marker, liberalizing movements all over the world, including ones that got proven to not be such great movements, like communism. But the more traditional and less secularly educated Jews, including great scholars of the Talmud and whatnot, were frightened by all of that and were in fact very conservative. Again, further evidence that the divide that we're seeing in the Jewish people right now is actually age-old. It's not, Trump has cracked the code and knows uniquely how to divide the Jews. This is a very familiar look for what happens to the Jewish people in moments such as this. I want to talk about Walzer for a minute, because he obviously takes the other side about you can't have the authoritarianism, even while acknowledging some of what Pinto wrote. Like, for instance, he does go on to acknowledge that the Jews did best under authoritarian rule when there was a court Jew, when there was access like that. And it wasn't ideal, but the Jews actually did fine under those circumstances. Obviously, freedom to be exactly whatever we want to be without currying favor is superior to that, but it does not mean it's 0 to 60 in 5 seconds as regards the bad. Walzer begins by talking about how Jews are getting a little snookered into by the Trump administration's guise of we're combating anti-Semitism by snatching people off the streets who have been pro-Palestinian. He points out how authoritarianism in this moment, and this is true around the world, this is also really important. Trump is not, he's sui generis on some level in the United States. Like it takes a character like him to make an engine like this work. But as we know, there are all kinds of regimes like this all over the world. This is a moment where this is happening. So Trump is more symptom than disease, if you see Trump as a bad thing. The current variety of authoritarianism is different than Hitler's was, different even than Mussolini's was, although it's closer to some of the other European regimes that were not Hitler, in the sense that it's populist in character. It is about selling people about they are a part of a people and them. They are the problem. And the reason why we can't fall for the targeting of pro-Palestinian activists, even if you are 100% opposed to what the pro-Palestinian folks are writing and saying, and what even if you were really agitated and bothered by the encampments on the campuses last spring and this sort of thing, getting suckered into buying into the targeting of pro-Palestinian Muslims right now, or Latino immigrants right now, is something Jews just can't afford to fall for, because this is about us too. When it comes time to define under difficult circumstances who the us is, who is the make America great again people, they're just not talking about us. And we know that from history. That's his fundamental contention. And what the most harrowing part of his point is, if you look at a protectionist nation, when it sells that kind of narrative, it's of us against the world, and then that nation falls on difficult times, say a really bad recession that we all know is coming. When that happens, the government, historically, if history teaches us anything, is that they go looking for scapegoats. And suddenly our access makes us a great one. And as I said before, hand in hand, the hunger for access, the success in gaining access, and then the scapegoating that comes with, if it weren't for those damn Jews, puppeteering everything, and they're doing fine, but I'm not doing fine in this time of crisis. This is how we end up getting taken advantage of in such moments. So yes, what I think Walzer is fundamentally saying is this authoritarianism great for us? No, but it is not Nazism either. And we have to figure out how to adapt to this moment, and we do a much, much better job tactically, not only psychologically, but tactically, by not putting on our "here come the Nazis" helmet, and instead put on our "what is coming" helmet. Curious eyes. This is different. This is not what we chose, and we have to figure out how to survive and hopefully figure out even ways to thrive, although there have been eras in Jewish history where it was about surviving for a while. And whoever told us that we were going to be immune from such things? Would have been lovely if we could get through all of our lives being immune, but Jewish history would tell you it'd be pretty unusual to live a life as long as our most elderly temple members. Some of you know our congregant Sid Machtinger, who just celebrated his 103rd birthday. It's hard to live to be 103 as a Jew and expect that you're going to end up in what we have enjoyed in post-World War II Jewish life for your entire life. It's just history would say that's not likely. I recognize that that's sad, but it doesn't have to automatically be discouraging or, worst of all, demoralizing. Because when demoralized, we actually play right into the hands of those who count on us to not engage in any kind of resistance or use of our democratic muscles, to use I believe the way Stephen Windmuller put it was to use the machinery of democracy to defend democracy, using the courts, using the universities, using all the things that are under target right now, using them as opposed to, oh God, well, look, they've seemed to have taken that over too. I guess there's no point in fighting City Hall. So you do what Paul Weiss did, and you just make a deal, even though you know you're 1,000% in the right? There's a lot of that going around. A lot of universities did it until God bless Harvard for not doing it, right? So unless you use the actual mechanisms, because you are not going to be so discouraged by how they're being pilloried that you're like, well, there's no point to using that. That kind of cynicism is a victory ticket for those who want to claim all the power for themselves. I want to point out one other thing that Walzer, I think, does a good job of kind of highlighting. He talks about how the Zionists hate the whole dependence on the court Jew model, right? Like the whole idea of Zionism was we ain't never being dependent on a court Jew ever again. And I don't care how many people I got to kill or how many members of my family might die in defense of that ideal, but we are not putting ourselves at the mercy of being court Jews, of being at the feet of masters ever again. We're going to be the masters. That is a key psychological distinction between the Jews who are in America and may love Israel very much, but have chosen to live here, and the Jews that love Israel a lot, and may even love America a lot, but have chosen to live there. This is, if some of you know a lot of Israelis, and you know what I'm talking about is right here. If you have been having difficulty getting Israel right now, or Israelis right now, they have answered the eternal question about the formula for Jewish survival differently than you do. And that is the difference that is animating the political. I know today's discussion wasn't really to be specifically about Israel, but in this regard it is. We are in America because we have believed, not necessarily in court Jew, but we have lots of opportunity here in a world that isn't Jewish. And we can ingratiate ourselves, and we can anesthetize ourselves from some dangers by having enough power or wealth or access or opportunity, right? Isn't that why your family came to this country? Why leave Russia and the pogroms behind? Because there I could be fully Jewish and be shtettled up, but here I could maybe we could someday win our way into the country clubs and win our way into the professions and win our way into the universities. And we've won our way into all those things. There is a little seed of court Jew in all of it. There's a little seed of court Jew in all of it. Because how many of you have heard me say before, this is one of my refrains of late, that we are conditionally white? You ever heard me say that one before? We are white in America in the sense that we are white presenting. Some of us, quote unquote, look more Jewish than others of us. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, right? We walk around, we are benefited when seeing a police car on the street in our white presentedness. We look white. But most of us also get that we're kind of white provisionally. When the real whites let us be white, we are white. So when the real whites decided to let us into the universities, we became white by their permission, for as long as that permission is granted. And when they let us into the country clubs, when it became, you didn't have to have Hillcrest Country Club. It's okay to join Hillcrest Country Club, but you didn't have to have it because you could also join the other country clubs. When that changed, it was the white people letting us be kind of fake white, a little white, whitish. But that can be rescinded, as we are discovering to some alarm of late, as we've watched anti-Semitism that we thought was gone, that we thought we'd beaten. And incidentally, if you are among those who are like, I never thought we beat it, well, then you're smarter than me. As I think I may have said to you guys before that if I have the written record of my work is a report card on how well I weathered the times in leading this community. What did I choose to talk about? What did I choose not to talk about? If you look at the lion's share of my career, one thing I chose not to talk about was anti-Semitism. Didn't see it as a hugely pressing problem, and if I'm being honest, fully honest, I saw those who waved around anti-Semitism during our better times as people who were kind of being utilitarian with that, using it to foment an emotional reaction to get certain outcomes that they wanted. I didn't always think the best of those who were willing to acknowledge that anti-Semitism was just kind of lurking. It always felt like that was a little too fraidy cat for my liking. I wish I could go back 10, 20 years ago and say a few things that I didn't say back then, because the written record does not make me look great in that one regard. Looks pretty good in some other regards, just to defend for myself a little bit, but it doesn't look great in that regard because I did not see the future very well. I did kind of feel like if we haven't beaten it, we've contained it. It's in a kind of box that it can't get too large, and it probably can't find all of us in this lovely Bel Air synagogue that we built with our own millions. We're probably going to be okay, is at least. I don't know that I consciously thought that, but probably subconsciously, yes, I did. So, if you want to get the difference between you and Israeli Jews, and if you want to understand why Israeli Jews are consciencing things right now that you cannot conscience, you have to actually go back to that defining difference about the Jewish survival story. They are not going to be court Jews ever again. This is the reason why on the High Holy Days this past year, when I wrote that letter, that long letter to the next generation, and I talked about no matter how much your vision is of a world that is post-Zionism. Zionism may have had its place, but now we're going to have a one big happy family where the Jews and the Palestinians live together in an Israel-Palestine, one country, where everybody has rights that are similar. And I know a lot of you are like, no, no, no way. Well, younger people, that's the only solution a lot of them will tolerate. And what I said to them in that sermon was, I hope you are, if you are seeing what's going on in Gaza right now as a genocide, well, 50,000-ish people, I hate to use ish with such ghastly numbers of people, but we don't know exactly how many are dead. We also don't know exactly how many of them are not Hamas, but whatever it is, because in those counts, they don't distinguish between militants and civilians the way we do. So, point is, tens of thousands of Palestinians are dead, many of whom were completely innocent. Many of whom were children and totally not combatants. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible travesty. And if you, young person, are aggrieved about that, how many Jews are you willing to see die for the creating of your vision of the future that looks like peace and harmony in the Levant? Because Israeli Jews do not look at the existence of Israel the way you do. You are not going to convince them, you know, this Israel thing was cool, but the best way to live in peace is for us not to have a Jewish state. Not the same people who hate the court Jew thing like nobody's business. You will not convince them. You will only convince them by killing enough of them to where they can no longer defend themselves. And so I asked aloud in that sermon, how many would be okay to die in order to get the state you want? 1 million of them? 2 million of the 7 million Jews who live in Israel? How many millions would be okay for you? Because you're not going to talk them into it. Same is true for all of us who may not need that kind of grotesque illustration, but to the extent that which myself as well, really aggravated by much of what I see working in Israel, remember the different sets of eyeglasses. They chose the opposite definition of what it is to survive. And they believe as awful as whatever we are seeing is, it beats dying as a people, and they already decided that we don't make it there's a reason they're not here. You understand my point? Okay. Stephen Windmuller lays out 5 characteristics of an contemporary authoritarian populist regime. They're on the first page it's on page 5 of the packet. He lays out 5 ingredients, and I would argue that all 5 of them are present in the current regime that we are seeing in the United States. This is not even to speak of Netanyahu regime, where it's also present. But putting that aside, because I don't want to go too far down the Israel, we talked about that last month, and we'll talk about it again. Back to America, centralization of power and the unregulated exercise of power. We definitely see the Trump administration. Again, I want to be clear, I'm not trying to be judgmental, and I say this to those of you online or here who may be much more comfortable with the steps this regime is taking than I am, or others in this room may be. I'm not trying to be judgmental. I'm trying to be analytical. Do we see the Trump administration attempting to centralize power with the executive branch and unregulating the exercise of its power? Yes, obviously we see that. That's a very intentional tactic that they are engaging in. Same true, the second one, political repression. Intimidating and threatening political opponents, like the law firms who represented Hillary Clinton, or like the universities that allowed too many demonstrations. Again, objectively speaking, that is present. Third, the imposition of social controls. You mean things like punishing institutions that engage in DEI, or, for instance, throwing all the trans soldiers out of the military? Yes, social architecting is a part of the story, according to Stephen Windmuller, and lo and behold, we're seeing that too. Fourth, manipulation of information. Do I have to describe this? And incidentally, the reason I say that is not to be glib about, quote unquote, their media, ours too. You've heard me say this long before Trump was a piece of the puzzle. We've all kind of cordoned off into our separate echo chambers of what counts as news. And how you know you're an older American is, do your children or grandchildren use any of the same news sources you do? The answer is almost certainly not. You are laughing out loud for a reason. They think you are an old Victrola reading your newspaper or your magazine or the things that I'm bringing to you. They think that all of this is ridiculous, and they are getting their news from sources that they trust, at least in concert with each other. They may not trust any one of them, but they think that I guess what they really trust is themselves to assess. And we trust forms that they do not trust. So manipulation of information cuts both ways. We've also been a part of buying into that system. And fifth, threats toward and interference with the media and press. I don't think I mean, it's abundantly clear. The fake news, fake news, fake news, fake news. You are fake news. You are no longer welcome to come to the to press briefings, the AP, So the point is, being straight analytical about this. This is the goal. And with the things that are to define an authoritarian, my point is, calling the Trump administration aspiring authoritarian, aspiring fascist, I'm not trying to engage in name calling. It is actually an attempt to build a different kind of government that does not value democracy in the same way that we do. That's the intent. So whether you like it or not is your decision to make, but I don't think it's a judgmental thing to say. And there are reasons why so many Americans want it. Think about it for a second. Think about, let's say, Congress. There are a lot of Americans who are on the wrong side of life, not meeting in their beautiful synagogue in Bel Air that they built with their millions, because they don't have millions. A lot of them who are saying to themselves right now, I was counting on the Congress to pass laws that would make life better for me. Our Congress for the last several decades is completely dysfunctional, incapable of passing a law for anything other than naming a post office. And we know this. Yeah, and giving themselves a raise. I mean, they can't pass a budget. It's continuing resolution and it's all BS, right? They end up using reconciliation to pass things that don't belong in reconciliation because they literally are completely dysfunctional. The Congress has broken down. It is not, we remember, and I say that to a bunch of people who know, as I do, I remember when it was not broken down. Even though my family was always Democrats, my parents, I think I've made the joke before that we were the one Kansas, I think my parents were 2 of the 7 Kansans who voted for McGovern. So like I've made this quip before. The point being, I grew up with tremendous admiration of some people on the other side of the political aisle who I disagreed with a lot. Remember people like Senator Dick Lugar from Indiana? I mean, these were amazing patriots. They saw things differently than I did, but you know what they did? They worked together with the other guy to pass laws. And somehow, things that were better for America happened. And I was grateful they were out there. Even if I were in their election, I'd vote against them. But I respected them, and I saw them working for the greater good. And the moment is actually upon us where, truth be told, if you are a lefty, the people representing you in Congress exist to obstruct the other guys. And if you are a righty, the people in Congress exist to obstruct the other guys. Remember how horrified we were when Mitch McConnell said our goal of the Obama presidency is to prevent the second Obama presidency? We're all horrified. Well, how many of you is your goal right now to prevent a third Trump presidency? Yeah, okay, well, while you're harumphing and snickering, that's your goal. We exist also to obstruct. For the people who are not in the getting anything out of this part of America, the ones who haven't done as well as we have, they're looking at that and they're like, they're kind of a pox on both your houses. We are losing huge, and nobody seems to be concerned about that. You guys want the status quo that enables you to be richer and more powerful, and they want the status quo that enables them to be richer and more powerful, and nowhere in there are there the things that are actually making my life better. And we all know, of course, that Trump is, as politicians do, using that angst to promise them to be a rainmaker for them. And obviously is a strange, it's strange to have a billionaire be the one speaking for them, which is why a lot of us don't believe it. But it's not such a mystery that they believe it. Not such a mystery that they believe it. So this is what Stephen Windmuller was talking about. He pointed out that there was a Pew study in 2024, just last year, that noted that 32% of Americans embrace authoritarian regimes. Think we would be better off being an authoritarian regime. Why? At least stuff gets done. Is it really a shock that they would find it appealing that there would be a strongman? I don't see anything really changing regardless of who's in office. I remain poor and uneducated, and I can't seem to win the fight. The wealth gap keeps getting larger and larger and larger in this country, and it doesn't matter which party's in power. I will acknowledge, statistically, it's been shown that the wealth gap gets larger faster under Republican regimes, but it doesn't mean it was getting smaller under Democratic regimes. It just slowed down its pace of getting larger. And we all know that, when you think about what making America great would look like, a lot of our families, my own included, going back to 50s, 60s, when the wealthiest people were taxed at a under the 90% under the Republican Dwight D. Eisenhower regime. 90%. And you know what that enabled? All kinds of families like mine to get their first home, to have a working class job. My grandparents, not a single one of them had a college education, not one of them. My parents, neither of them, my dad ended up getting an executive MBA later in his life, but neither of my parents, they both had what is referred to on the forms where you fill out about your identity, some college, right? They went to college for a little while, but did not graduate from college. My brother and I were, in our linear family, the first generation to graduate from college. Yep, you too. There you go. So these guys who are angry out there, and the 32% of them were like, let's try a strongman, are like, that's all we want. The same shot you got once upon a time. Well, we don't get that shot anymore. And it doesn't really matter whether Biden's in office or Obama's in office or Trump's in office. It doesn't, the parts that are changing and are agitating you so much don't really affect me all that much. Life keeps sucking for me. So, and what's more, they've been starved oftentimes of information, given misinformation, usually are less educated than we are also, which is itself a sign of the wealth gap, right? Because I'm going to get to this and just concluding in just a couple of minutes, I'm going to point out a few things I recommend for you to read that will burn a hole through this idea that our education advantage is not just because we value education more. It is because the whole game is slanted in our favor. It is rigged for our families at this point. Once upon a time, it was less rigged, and our families grabbed it and seized it and took advantage of it, which is why I got to be college educated, you got to be college educated. But without a doubt, we're in a different kind of moment and have been there for quite some time. And so, as you read in Stephen's piece, he quotes from Charles Murray's book, written in 2012, in the middle of the Obama administration. Great times, right? Well, if you're us, great times. Quote, "The resentment felt by one side of the divide is unfortunately often matched by the arrogance and condescension shown by the other, which merely accentuates the resentment. The more we run around going, wow, the good old days, Barack Obama, the more pissed off they get. Nothing gets done. I'll tell you who gets stuff done. Trump. He runs around saying, on day one, I will be a dictator. Great. And you say you'll be a dictator for me. You can't have the widening gap the way it's been going on for the last really 40 years since the Reagan administration and on. I'm not just putting it all on Reagan, for those of you who may be Reagan fans, but it really did kind of begin, if you look at the change in the laws and whatnot, taxes and whatnot, all of this begins to really change under the Reagan administration and keeps on going through the H.W. Bush and keeps on going through Bill Clinton and keeps on going and keeps on going. So whichever your favorite regimes are, kept on going during them too. We are really, as Stephen says, this is less about Republican versus Democrat. This is where we get snookered. Every now and then, I hear, in fact, even today, I hear folks say, oh, I heard about this famous Republican, right-leaning journalist who's come over to, quote, our side. That means they're now blue team instead of red team. We're misreading the whole fight. Fight is not blue and red, at least in the ways that we have historically defined blue and red. They may still hold, like, titles, R next to their name, D next to their name. But this is racial and class and socioeconomic, and this is decline and fall of the Roman Empire stuff. There was always going to be a time where if we allowed the wealth gap to continue to grow like this, sooner or later, the peasants rise up. And we, as people who never had to live through such a revolution, hold up such revolutions as great moments in history. The French Revolution, let's sing about Les Mis. The American Revolution, they overthrew the king, and they made this amazing country that had never existed before. We're all super attracted to revolutions. I remember when we were having a conversation, I had a town hall gathering with Temple members about during the Barack Obama Iran nuclear deal. Some of you were there. We held this gathering, and we do this periodically. Something is going on. We don't want to create conditions for people of different opinions to talk to each other about it. So we did this. And I remember that was attended that day by one of our Iranian American members, one of the Persian Jews, a member of our temple. And she raised her hand to speak. And she said, as someone who lived through the Iranian Revolution, I just want to have you know, revolutions aren't all they're cracked up to be. I know that it's like, because remember, this is also in the throes of Bernie's revolution, our revolution, right? We're going to have a revolution. There's a reason why that seems super appealing as language to people who've never been through a revolution. We might be going through a revolution, folks. How much can you allow we allow the 60% of the country to possess 1% of the wealth? I mean, like, I remember sitting in this very room not long after this building was completed, maybe a year or two after. I was approached by the leadership of the national movement of which our local interfaith broad-based LA Voice is a part, PICO National. So it's a interfaith social justice community organizing body. And they wanted me to host here a gathering nationally to talk about anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and Christian hegemony in organizing spaces. Really powerful. And I was honored for us to host. And a young black organizer who works very closely, he's in Texas, lives in Texas and organizes with the big Reform congregation that there's a rabbi down there who grew up at our temple, Kim Herzog-Cohen, is actually a really important partner of his. This is Eric Alava Shalom, and Jane Herzog's daughter is a rabbi there and knows this guy really well. I met him during this gathering, but she told me, oh God, he's amazing, you're gonna love him. And I did. And he was sitting over kind of like over where Linda is over there, and I was sitting kind of over here in a big circle of all the people who were attending. And he said, he was talking about the economic goals that they were seeking. He and his people and the folks he represented were seeking. And he used this phrase. He's sitting in our beautiful Beit Midrash. I always hesitate to say this with you sitting here, Peachy, since you and Mark gave the lead gift. To be fair, a lot of people gave to support and back your lead gift, but you guys, there's a reason your names are on the building. He's sitting in our beautiful Beit Midrash, sitting over on that side of the room, and he says, you guys are not understanding. If we are to succeed, all of this will be gone, is what he said. All of this will be gone. And now I'm like, maybe it was a questionable choice to agree to host this little shindig. I'm not looking quite like I thought I was going to be like big justice hero guy hosting the gathering. Instead, it's big white presenting rabbi guy of Bel Air in his multi-million-dollar palace, built without any need for public funds because the private funds were more than enough to make it perfect. And he's like, all of this will be gone. And he says, we know one of the reasons there's such a break between the black organizing community right now and the Jewish organizing community is that we know that for now, when we look at the various bills and measures, we're always on the same team. But we know there will come a point where you will have to give away some significant part of your advantage. And we know that's why he said it that way. He was definitely trying to provoke us. Not in a mean way. A great case of, what did I say before? Agitation. Good agitation. He was trying to agitate us Jews. It's exactly what he was doing, right? He's saying, all of this will be gone. I'm like, my beautiful Beit Midrash. I don't want it to be gone. We worked so hard to make this happen, right? And of course, we know it is hard work. We had to raise the money privately. All of you, most of you at least, gave something that probably was a meaningful sum to you to make this happen. They don't have that option as the way to organize, because if they go to all their people and have them give their best gift, they can maybe have lunch. But they're not building a building like this. All of this will be gone. And he's like, we know you won't be on team. All of this will be gone. And I'm like, I didn't say it out loud, but I'm like, yep, we will not be on team. All of this will be gone because we're winning. So, to conclude, it's hard. It is hard. A couple of points in conclusion. One has to do with this whole anti-Semitism and is Trump on the side of the Jews fighting anti-Semitism and whatnot. I know how many of you caught 2 days ago, the Education Secretary, Linda McMahon, sent a new letter to Harvard to try to intimidate them. And it was kind of, some of you are snickering because it was kind of absurd. And some of it clearly had the kind of language that Trump himself probably wrote, because it sounded a lot more like one of his, well, I don't know what you call his tweets, his truths. But the point is, it was pretty ridiculous. But I don't know if you noticed something that I myself didn't notice until I read something online, someone who pointed it out. There was something curiously absent from this particular threat on Harvard. Anybody know what didn't get brought up? as he stepped up the game to come after Harvard harder, try to win the zero-sum game? What might have been absent this time? Any mention of the Jews and anti-Semitism. He's stripped away the guys there. Well, it didn't work. And we know that Trump doesn't believe that there can be two parties that win. He's kind of a zero-sum game kind of guy. Either we're going to win or China's going to win, right? We're going to win or the Palestinians are going to win. It's usually zero-sum. And the same is true here. And so when using the Jews didn't work, well, let's just go straight at, you basically disagree. I mean, that whole letter, it's like 2.5 pages, loaded up with, you stand for liberal things. You stand for left of center things. We're opposed to your policy, and that is why we're trying to close you. And the Jews, not a mention. Yes, without a doubt. Yes, exactly. Wrestling. Yes. Thank you, Gary. So I wanted to point that out just as an extra little ingredient for you to carry around. I want to point out Stephen Windmuller. When we talk about an end to this conversation, because yes, there is no end, he makes some great recommendations. It's on page 7 in the packet if you're interested in looking. He talks about speak out in defense of democracy, so do not get cowed by your own cynicism. Do not allow the malaise of this moment, the despair that you are feeling, if you are feeling despair, allow that despair to make you sort of kind of give up and say, we've lost. That is the definition of losing. That's what they're waiting for you to do. 2, he says, promote and build alliances and coalitions that are designed to uphold and defend democratic practices. That might mean, folks, making alliances and coalitions with groups that were not necessarily there for us on October 7th the way you wanted. Amazing how that issue feels real different. At that time, a lot of the long-standing relationships that even I had in the interfaith community were being deeply challenged. It's amazing how a lot of that is just being sort of backburnered for the moment, because when they come for one of us, they come for all of us. That famous Pastor Martin Niemöller teaching, first they came for the trade unionists. I didn't say anything because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the communists. And they came for the, you name it. And finally they came for me, and there was nobody to speak for me. So if you've ever seen that quote before, yeah. So yes, so alliances and coalitions are going to mean standing up for the people whose speech you deeply oppose. Leo Beck Temple, I'm proud to say, was approached by the law firm representing Rumeysa Öztürk. She is the Tufts University graduate student who you saw on video getting snatched off the street. Snatched off the street by black clothes. They said they were from the government, but no evidence of it. I mean, it was a pretty terrifying video, right? And her crime, they willingly acknowledge they're not accusing her of a crime. Her crime was she wrote an op-ed that was pro-Palestinian, and they don't like that, so they went and got her. Leo Beck Temple was approached by her legal team, her law firm, and they were wanting to file an amicus brief signed by Jewish organizations that would say, while we firmly oppose the contents of her op-ed, we do not believe that snatching people like her off the street without due process makes Jews safer. Sooner or later, that boomerangs on Jews. And not surprisingly, it wasn't a huge number of Jewish organizations that signed on to this. Why? It's a lot of, you're putting a bullseye on yourself, right? You have to assume that someone over in the Trump administration might see what are the Jewish organizations that are on the enemies list. There were only 7 or 8 synagogues that signed on it. We were among them, nationwide. And only 27 Jewish organizations, most of whom, including both synagogues and institutions, are the usual suspects, the folks that you would expect to take chances for justice. I'm proud that we did. I'm super proud of our senior lay leaders. This is not a decision I made on my own. I'm not committing Leo Beck Temple's name to something that might well have them coming after our 501c3 status. That's not a responsible thing for me to do as your senior employee. The lay leaders are the fiduciaries. They own Leo Beck Temple. I just work for it. So I went to our president and immediate past president, and boy, am I proud of them. They basically said, all the reasons for us not to sign this are the reason for us to sign this. If we think they're not going to come for us too, We're just deluding ourselves. And they are not crazy left-wingers either. We're not talking about extreme leftists. They just know enough about history to know that this is a time to use the engines of the democratic regime to try to protect the democratic regime. No, they decided not to. Didn't have time. It was the following morning that we'd have to file it, so there wouldn't have been any way to bring it to the board. And I see you shaking your head, and you can say all you want about whether it was a fair decision, not a fair decision. What I'll tell you is this. If we had tried to bring it to the board, the answer would have been we're not signing, because we did not have the time to be able to do it. It was brought to us the day before it was going to be filed. And they made it clear to us, we recognize you may not be able to sign because of the time constraint. And their attitude was, if this ends up, one of the things I discussed with them was, this is going to show up in the media. People are going to be able to find out that Leo Beck-Temple signed on to this. Members who support the government are going to be able to see that we did this. Are you cool with standing behind having represented the temple in this way? And the answer is, we will take some heat for it, but given the constraints of the circumstance, we're willing to stick our necks out to do that. Correct. 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 The alternative was to not sign. It would be filed. They told us they told us they were no longer interested in our signature until a day later. Yeah, incidentally, some things do happen here by decisions that I or they make. Not everything is brought to a board vote. And this was the kind of thing that if we had a week, we absolutely would have brought to a board vote. If you were president, you might have done differently. I'm telling you that I was proud of them. Yep, yep. You guys can take all the issue you want to take with our president and immediate past president. Feel free to give them a call. Tell them that you're displeased. I will say for my part that I thought it took great courage to do what they did under the circumstance, and that there was no, they were unable to do that under the circumstance that we were in. They were deliberating it on the evening that we would have to be meeting with the executive committee. So when forced to choose between not signing and signing, they said, we will face the opprobrium that might come from having acted authoritarianly, which is what they did.
So that was a few weeks ago. Has there been any pushback?
No.
Alan, with all respect, I'm proud.
Yep. Yep. Hold on just a moment. I want to make sure you're being heard, so please should we just pass the microphone over to Gary? That one's not plugged in, so pass this one. Thank you. And you'll have to switch it on. You'll have to switch it on.
Edgar Magnin would not have taken it to his president, and so I'm
Which is
proud.
not necessarily
I'm proud.
right, wrong, or indifferent. It's just the point is the circumstance was unique. Just so you know, last night there is another thing that we were asked to sign on to. A broad coalition of nonprofits are joining together, and it's not just faith organizations, to sign on to a letter decrying the threatening of not-for-profit status for organizations brought to the executive committee for a vote because there was time. It's not their desire to do that without being able. It was their desire to make sure Leo Beck-Temple's name showed up, and precisely because they assumed correctly that few organizations would be willing to stick their necks out for Rumeysa Öztürk. Sticking your neck out for our tax status? They assumed people would probably be in favor of that. Keeping your contributions to Leo Beck-Temple deductible on your taxes, they figured the board would probably stand with them on that. But the Rumeysa Öztürk thing was a risky move for them, and they acknowledged that. It was not their desire to do it that way. The alternative was to not do it. So, moving right along. He also points out, and this is what I want to conclude with regard to Stephen. He talks about encouraging the creation of a national service program that would create opportunities for young Americans to build shared connections and mutual experiences. Let's be honest, folks. In this America, there is no America anymore. All those things that used to make us appended to one another no longer do. I happened to bump into, flipping around the channels last night, the movie Sully on HBO. Any of you ever see it? Yeah. Movie Sully, where Tom Hanks plays Chesley Sullenberger, the pilot who landed that U.S. Airways jet on the Hudson. Okay, incredible movie, because it's amazing how they recreated that. I don't know how they did that, but movie magic. In any case, it sure looked like the plane was landing on the Hudson and people were getting up and standing on the wings the way they actually did. It was an incredible movie. In any case, I mentioned this because I was watching the movie, and all I could think to myself was I remembered, and that was in January of '09 is when that happened. And I was remembering how that was just such an incredible, proud, uniting moment for Americans. And all I could think was that if that happened today, it would instantly be politicized and turned into, that's because of the robbing of the federal aviation funding, and it would instantly become a culture wars political football, and there would be no uniting by Americans by that miracle on the Hudson. It just wouldn't happen. What we would do is be used, commoditized, to hate each other even more because it happened. There's no America left. Stephen is saying, if you want to penetrate, if you want us to really get the suffering of them, you got to actually bring us and them. They got to create something that makes America again and America again. I want to conclude by making 4 brief recommendations of things to read. Thing number 1 is an article in the New Yorker that was published on April 28th. It is entitled, "Is the U.S. Becoming an Autocracy?" And it is a fairly lengthy piece. It talks about how today's autocracies are different than Hitler's Germany, and yet, your grandfather's autocracy is not today's autocracy. And he talks a lot about, in the piece, post-2011 Viktor Orban in Hungary. Orban had been elected and ruled pretty democratically his first time. Then he was out of office, ran in a much more autocratic way, won again, and turned the thing into autocracy. Sound familiar, anybody? So, talks about how kind of one step at a time, normative, it looks and smells like a democracy, but it doesn't behave like one. And that this is kind of what a modern autocracy looks like. So it's a valuable piece, I think, for you to read. Second, a piece in The Atlantic that was published on April 22nd, entitled "A Ticking Clock on American Freedom." Gary's nodding because he's read it. It's disturbing, but it's important. A ticking clock on American freedom. In it, the story of Maria Ressa, who is an unbelievable, I wanted to tell everybody, Maria Ressa was the guest, the honoree of the Bierman Foundation. We just had her at Leobeck Temple within the last year. I would dare say, and I actually sent this to Joan Bierman, who sent it to Maria, who sent me a thank you. I said, I actually believe she is the bravest person I've ever met in my life. And I've met some, and I also said the most consequential person that I've met in my life. And I met John Lewis. I met a bunch of presidents. I mean, I've met some pretty serious people. She's this little itty-bitty Filipino woman who brought down Duterte. She, when this was going on there, she literally trained her whole journalistic enterprise. She had a media, journalism. I understand. She trained these people, and you read this article about how to just roll camera when you see the violations, and tell stories of people rolling camera with their hands shaking because, like, I'm documenting this thing. I'm using the engines of democracy to protect democracy, right? Got thrown in prison, this little itty-bitty woman, for doing it. There was a movement, kill Maria, jail, I think it was. It wasn't to say kill Maria Ressa. They used a lot more violence in their regime than we're seeing in America right now. And Maria is still doing what she does for a living, and Duterte's in prison in The Hague. So this is a pretty consequential little itty-bitty woman who makes John Lewis look like he was afraid of something. It's a pretty extraordinary story. Read her story. Third, the Jewish Journal, which I don't do a lot of reading of these days, but the Jewish Journal on April 30th published a op-ed piece called Trumponomics, written by the recently retired president of Northwestern University, Morty Shapiro, who is an economist. He is not president there anymore. He stepped down in 2023 and moved back to LA, where he was originally from. And he and I are friends. During the years that that Ben, my son Ben, was going to Northwestern, Morty and I became good friends. And so I see Morty from time to time. Was actually with him over Pesach. He has been publishing pieces for the journal, and he wrote a piece really using his economist hat. And he's basically making the argument, follow the economics if you want to understand. Like, find an economist who actually believes that the way to fight anti-Semitism is by ending all of the research money for fighting diseases and climate change and whatnot. Like, if you can find me any political stripe, doesn't matter. Find us an economist who thinks that this is actually going to work and that it won't boomerang on Jews. Morty is no fire-breathing lefty, but he can see with his economist goggles whether this is good for the Jews or not. So I think it's a worthwhile thing to read. And finally, an older piece from The Atlantic. This is from November 14th, 2024, so shortly after the election, entitled, How the Ivy League Broke America. How the Ivy League Broke America. This is probably, out of all of them, my strongest recommendation, because unless we are willing to accept that we are a part of the problem, we are not going to solve the problem. It is not just whoever your they is that is the problem. We are all being taught to hate them, whoever them is, not me. Unless we are willing to hold our piece of this problem, we will not be able to figure out its solution. And his piece is, this piece, it was written by Brooks, incidentally. David Brooks is the writer of the Atlantic piece. He does a great job of laying out how all the things that enable our kids to get into better colleges, all of those things are contributing mightily to this. Think about the legacy thing, right? Eliana is right now studying at Tufts University, where her mother went to school. Is it a coincidence? I don't know. Eliana was a really good student. We all tell ourselves these things, don't we? Really strong student and, earned her place. Might there be some other kids very much like Eliana that didn't have a well-placed mother? And what's more, it talks about just the growing divide between those that have, in terms of it talks about how different careers are only hiring people with college diplomas, but the job doesn't require a college diploma. So you've created a caste society where you got to have that diploma in order to even get the job that you don't need a diploma for. And of course, we have all bought into this because we've figured out how to play the game, and we've won. And our kids and grandkids are all college educated. It's great to be on the right side of it, but if you're on the wrong side of it, don't be surprised that 32% of Americans are okay with authoritarianism. And incidentally, good luck running. If you want to run your next campaign on, look at them, they're destroying democracy, 1/3 of America will say, yeah, I know. Thank God. Finally, they're destroying democracy. Democracy left me in the crapper. 1/3. I will take your aggrieved comments. Pass the microphone, please. Make sure we get the microphone. Thanks.
I'd like to point out two different things.
It's on. It's on. Just get nice and close.
Singapore is an example of a benevolent democracy, benevolent authoritarian.
Yeah.
Paul was there during the Second World War, and
right.
it was a sewer, an absolute sewer. Prostitution, drugs, etc.
Yep.
I don't remember the person's name, but he came in, and now Singapore is one of the most thriving areas in the world.
I can go further.
And, yeah.
Your point is so valid.
Yeah,
How about,
so
let's go closer to home. It's not a name that gets a lot of popularity these days, but remember what Rudy Giuliani did as mayor of New York City?
Yes.
Nobody liked the way it was done. He kind of strongman came in there, and do you like having a good time in Manhattan? Because before that, it was kind of not safe to have a good time in Manhattan. But then we, who have enough money to buy all those great theater tickets, came back flocking when the strongman went and cleaned up New York City.
The second thing I'd like to point out, that I don't feel that Trump is following that benevolent aspect of it. Because
I doubt
the
you're alone
differ-
in that
Yes,
feeling.
because the variance between the wealthy and the poor, I believe, is going to escalate beyond belief with his way of doing things. So there's the positive on one side and the negative on the other.
Yeah, just because there are some benevolent dictators doesn't mean all dictators are benevolent. That's for sure. Gary, go ahead.
I have recently come to understand, or at least accept for myself, the importance of the word priorities. I've read there are two quotes that I keep telling people who I'm having debates with. The one is the Daniel Patrick Moynihan quote that you're entitled to your own opinions, you're not entitled to your own facts. And the other that I just published in one of my weekly things is Muhammad Ali's quote, if you haven't learned anything between the age of 20 and the age of 50, you've wasted 30 years. And I've really taken both to heart. I keep telling people around here that who really want to just argue liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, stop it. If you love our Constitution, if you believe it was on the right track, even though written by racists, then you have to basically say it was really bad when liberals like me or progressives like me respected the other side, even if we disagreed, but they didn't merely say I was wrong, they said I was dangerous. That's the transformation that has happened, I think, that's been the most dangerous. And when I say priorities, I spent most of April in South Korea and Japan, and we heard from a defector from North Korea, 30-year-old young man who studied in Paris because North Koreans needed the mechanical engineering background that they could only get in Paris. And then he learned by reading John Stuart Mill's On Liberty that he had been brainwashed, and he defected to South Korea. And then I heard from a survivor of Hiroshima, 84-year-old gentleman who showed us his burns, 5 years old at the time. And I came away from both experiences with the idea of priorities. Let's stop, as you indicated, Ken, forgetting that today's crisis is not a crisis of liberal conservative. I long for Ronald Reagan. I remember when Reagan walked up and down the line of the survivors, the families of the Challenger, and I remember thinking, I'm glad he's my president. He's showing empathy. I really remember thinking that, even if I disagree with him on everything else. This is not liberal conservative. This is our Constitution. This is our Constitution. When the man says, I don't know, and when Pam Bondi says, and when Besant, when they all reject the question about due process, then you realize where the fight needs to be. We, as progressive people, need to respect the debate that we used to have and focus on the bigger picture, which is our Constitution is under attack, and there is where we ought to be focusing our attention.
So that's the formula, Gary's formula for Stop Trump. And I just want to cite David Brooks's brilliant formulation of this. A civic uprising has to have a short-term vision and a long-term vision. Short-term, stop Trump. Foil his efforts, pile on the lawsuits, turn some of his followers against him. The second is a long-term vision of a fairer society that is not just hard on Trump, but hard on the causes of Trumpism. All this stuff that when you read How the Ivy League Broke America, we will hopefully be readier to claim our piece of what has gone awry in this country that we love. Who else? Go ahead.
So I love this conversation. I think it's very significant to the various generations that are in this room. What I'm finding with the younger generation is less so much their concern about democracy,
Exactly.
breakdown of society. They don't see it as a political divide. What they see as their main concern is the rise of AI. So I don't want to throw us off topic, but the rise of AI rendering certain jobs, certain qualifications, college degrees irrelevant.
What I would say to you, B, is that I think that it's actually, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just want to say that you're pointing to the same thing, the economic divide. They're afraid for their economic. It's not about the passion necessarily of this job versus that one, but they're
Right,
watching.
There's not an enemy that is in human form.
Without it, yeah, no, right. But although humans do have control over the use of technology, and one of the things that has become a real problem for our generation, actually for the last several decades, is the advent of more and more new technologies without any common communal, whether it's regulation by law or just common practices. Remember when it felt weird or inappropriate that people would be walking by on their phone screaming at somebody while they're walking by you on the street, and it was kind of seen as sort of socially inappropriate? Now it's just taken for granted. It's what we're all doing, right? Because there was never established any kind of guardrails for how do you remain an us while all of this stuff pops up. And now comes AI, and B is 100% right. I mean, I have 3 kids in their 20s, and I will tell you, like, this is what everybody in their 20s is talking about, and if in their 30s, and even in their teens. I teach our confirmation class. They're concerned about the fact that a lot of the things that they want to do may not even be things to do anymore. And so you want to talk about the dangers of this divide. If suddenly all kinds of things dry up that used to be a way out and are no longer, so now the options for getting out are even slimmer, and the divide in terms of wealth gap is already greater, and then comes a recession. Who do you think's going to get blamed, folks, apropos of our topic today? We have a lot of history of knowing what happens in such moments. Yes, go ahead, Shelley.
I want to put my remarks in a historical perspective. Graduated college in 1962, and I had a class, History of Political Theory, and the professor goes through all of the variations of running a country, and said at that time, the most perfect form of government is a totalitarian government. It's flawless, because if you disagree, you die. The worst form of government is democracy, because democracy reflects all of human pathos, all of the pluses and minuses of a person. So you have a choice. And that was quite a comment for someone 20 years old.
I believe it. Other comments, questions, reactions? Alan. Make sure you speak real closely into that mic because it picks up not as well as this one, the cordless ones. Yeah.
You raised the Bishop Niemöller quote. I was going to raise it when I spoke in a slightly different context. And that was the early context that you were talking about, that this is not or should not be compared to Nazism. I think using terms like Nazism is not important. It's the result that counts. First, they came from the transgender people.
Yep.
I think that's something that we need to be concerned about.
For sure.
Not necessarily because it affects us as Jews, although down the line it will, but it's going to affect step by step transgender, Latinos, blacks, Jews, Asians.
Yep.
That's what we have to worry about.
Muslims,
And Muslims.
women, Muslims, pro-Palestinian people. This is the alliance business that we're talking about.
The major danger is something that we saw in a Supreme Court decision yesterday, that the majority of the current Supreme Court is willing, it looks to me, like letting most, maybe not all, but most of these things occur.
Yeah, no, this is why I said, hindsight's 2020, wouldn't it be interesting if we knew what was coming to go back to a year and a quarter ago about, well, we can't do business with these people because they weren't with us on 10/7. It's just not a luxury that we have in this moment. And truth be told, we now know that it wasn't a luxury we had in that moment. We just felt like we had that luxury, but we didn't have it, right? If you are yearning to go back to the status quo of before when Trump rode down the golden escalator, all you're doing is yearning to go back to the time that invented Trump going down the golden escalator. So if you're like, God, it was so great then, can't we have that back? And incidentally, I'm as guilty, I'm not accusing you of anything I wouldn't accuse myself of. I keep thinking, I remember the number of times I've said out loud, Barack Obama opposed to gay marriage, and then in 2015, gay marriage was legalized in all 50 states. That's the advancement that our society achieved in the space of 7 short years. And it's true. I'm not wrong about any of that. But it's this lionizing of that moment while these people were seething at us and our growing acceptance of a massive disadvantage. And even all of us, I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, I never liked that growing divide. I voted for tax increases for this or that. I voted for things that would enable affordable housing or any number of different things that would help to lift those folks up. Yeah, you did. That's true. And yet, we are part of a society that failed to achieve those objectives and just kept winning. Doesn't mean we did so with malice. They're not angry at us because they're assessing whether we liked it or not. They're angry because we have. And I will tell you, I think we have, at least in the short term, better reason to be anxious about being caught being wealthy than even being caught being Jewish. There's wealthy and educated and living in these extremes where flyover country is judged negatively. This is as a guy who grew up in the dead center of the United States. So, go ahead, Beverly.
The thing that he's done that has made it easier for them is dehumanizing everybody who's on the other side.
Yeah.
So it's the Muslims, it's the immigrants, it's the judges, it's the press, it's the media, it's anybody who comes out against something that he's for.
Right.
And he's not for anything, so it's really hard to keep track of what he's against.
Well, and this is, what you just said is on Stephen Windmuller's list of the 5 tactics, right? It's right there. And again, I say this for those who may be viewing us or who are here in the room and are Trump supporters. I'm not saying that to be judgmental of him. I'm saying it to analyze, like that is in fact a tried and true tactic of how you get more power. I mean, that's how governments do it. And there's a reason he likes the Orbans and the Putins, because he's imitating their tactic. He's doing what they've done, and he's having some success doing it. And if you're concerned about that and you still want lower taxes or greater military spending, all the things that Republicans like, we're all on the same team. This is not about, as Gary was saying before, about whether or not you favor normative Republican policy or normative Democratic policy. This is about, do you see what has allowed the exploitation of this country to turn into what it say? Do you see what has happened to us such that a character like Trump, how many times you've asked yourself, oh, he seems so buffoonish, how does anybody buy into that? They don't even have to buy into it. They're just pissed. And they see that here's a guy who seems to be able to get stuff done. And, when we talk about, quote, trolling the libs, what it really is showing those guys, yeah, I can make them go bonkers. I can actually, with the wave of my hand, I can make Kilmar Obrego Garcia just vanish. I have the power to do that, which means I have the power to do whatever the hell I want. That's attractive to them. Scary to us, because we did all of our winning in a democratic regime. Will we fight for a different future than the status quo of when he rode down the escalator, which is when we thought the problem began? if you're opposed to Trump. If you are opposed to Trump, him coming down the escalator and announcing he's running for president was the beginning of this long nightmare. Not so for 32% of Americans who say, give me authoritarianism, please. I'll have a little more. I think we can do this. History has shown that these regimes don't last forever. Let us be a part of ending this scare for whatever policy may grow from it, whether it be conservative or liberal. May it be policy that grew from an American population working as a nation, as a republic, interested in the advancement of fairness for all Americans, not just of, cover my tuchus and keep my investments growing. If you're worried about what's happening to your